Welcome to Scottish Watches podcast. It feels like ages ago the last time we sat down and recorded one of these because we've been on our travels. You thought Geneva Watch Days was the last little embarking for me and Dave to go and check out some new releases, but it turns out we got to see some cool things at the weekend that we found out there that we're not allowed to talk about, and we found out there from Dave, who told us we can't talk about it.
You're indeed correct. So this is where the two worlds of David collide. So David Araj, David Scottish Watches, and we had our first ever media camp for Araj Watches, where we had 8 lucky guests, Ricky being one of them, who came along, and we did something a little bit different. We brought along all of our watchmakers, we brought along engineers.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in and say we'll talk about that later on. Non-binary Dave is just going to have to go back in his little box just now and wait, because there's plenty more stuff to chat about. But this is a good opportunity to say, play along at home. Click the link, it'll take you to the website. Specifically for this episode, it'll have all the pictures, the tech spec, the links, all the bits and bobs that you need to basically see the watches as we're chatting about it. So we should probably start off with a bit of a budget banger. And this one harks back to the kung fu fighting style of the 70s and the 80s and the legend that is Bruce Lee. Now, you're a Seiko guy, we do know this. I was supposed to have one of these watches to check out, but they've been so popular that Seiko in the UK couldn't even get one to me, even for a couple of days. But we've had a look at the pictures, we know what the quality's like because we've had so many Seikos, we own so many Seikos. But Dave, you can quickly tell us about this one.
Absolutely. So Seiko 5 has to be said, since they reintroduced the new generation of Seiko 5s, a couple of years ago, these have been more than a little bit popular, both with people on a bit of a budget and collectors, full stop, because they are very collectible. Not all of them are always going to float your boat, but this one, if you like a darker toned watch, this is definitely going to probably appeal to you. And if you like Bruce Lee, it's definitely going to appeal to you. So it is a 50-year anniversary of the passing of Mr. Bruce Lee, which is a lot longer than most people think it was, but also aligns with the 55th anniversary of the Seiko 5 introduction way back in the day. And this one, I'm regretting not putting my hand up earlier to request one, because I probably could have had one, as it's a limited edition, albeit very much in the Seiko style of 15,000 of them, which is also fair to say is not the largest limited edition they've ever done, but it's certainly not the smallest either. Super cool looking. You've got lots of little kind of nods and winks back to Bruce Lee, to the martial arts, to lots of these things that he was known as. He was also known to wear a Seiko 5 back in the day, albeit one of the more vintage style ones. Unlike some they've done before, not too gaudy. It's black and gold, which might turn some people to think, do I, don't I? But it's subtle enough with the gold, I think, to pass pretty well. I'm really taken by this one, really like it, bit upset I didn't get one. Round about the $500 US mark, so probably in the UK something in the area of 450, I believe, something of that neck of the woods. If you can still see one and you fancy it, I would grab it, because these ones did move rather quickly.
You're right. And when I was speaking to Seiko and I was pleading with them to get me one, they said, what we can do is we can arrange for you to go into one of the retailers local to you and have a look at it, and they'll allow you to do this before they sell it to a customer. That was the best they could do, so I don't think too many are left by the time you hear this. But if you do like what you see, you might be able to grab one on the secondary market for a little bit of an inflated price. Speaking of inflated prices, how's the new Swatch Mania stuff coming along? We've not really heard much about that. It's kind of died in its arse.
I think it's fair to say that it is not being quite as dominant as the Moon Swatch. I forecast this, as did.
Told you so.
Absolutely. I think pretty much everybody of any sense forecast this, which was pretty much between 1 and 3 weeks. It was going to be a little bit more challenging to get one. I think it actually died off pretty much within a week, is my understanding. So the launch day, you couldn't get one unless you were willing to stand in a line. 2-3 days after that, it kind of became a bit more. If you popped in a morning, you might be lucky. The week after it, they seem to get a delivery 2-3 times a week.
There has been some debate online about the movement inside it. And some people are saying that you can play around with it, you can fix it if it goes funny, and other people are saying no. So I've been paying more attention to that than the hullabaloo about actually getting the watch itself. And from what I know, and that is not much, the System 51 inside is replaceable, as in you can take the unit out usually from normal watches, but in this one it's plastic welded on the back or something, so you can't actually change the movement.
Broadly speaking, the System 51 movement is based pretty significantly on a standardised ETA time date movement. Nothing particularly fancy. But what they did do was they managed to work out a way how to fully or essentially fully automate the building and assembly of these. So it's built by robots. That takes out people, that takes out time, that takes out cost. So it allows them to have an automatic movement in a Swatch watch where otherwise either you couldn't do it, or if you did do it, it would make a Swatch watch not a Swatch watch price. That led to a few compromises, shall we say, when it came to construction in terms of lack of screws. Machines don't like screws. They're not so clever at picking up these little screws and putting them in the right place. So they're either riveted or spot welded. And that means that it becomes effectively non-serviceable from a point of view of taking it apart, because taking it apart is destructive to it. It means that they are, for all intents and purposes, disposable.
I think people get their knickers in a knot about this a little bit too much. It's a fairly inexpensive watch, and if you, in a few years' time, ran into bother with it, if you were to take it to a watchmaker, think of the cost, first of all, in labour, because that's a very skilled job, and if you take your car in places, it's 40, 50, 60, £150 per hour. Then you're going to look at the fact they're going to have to buy parts, they're going to have to buy a replacement module, if they can get one, or they're going to have to try and tart up something with a System 51, they ain't going to be able to do much. So you've got to weigh all these things together, and if you're looking for something that you are going to spend a few £100 on, you want it to last, you want it to be serviceable, look at the Seiko 5. Look at the more inexpensive lines that have perhaps got Miyota movements in them, they've got the NH35 or equivalents. That's where you should be looking. Don't expect to be able to fix these things if they go buggered in a little while. And when it comes to the whole recycling stuff, it's a bit strange because it's a watch. And the size of it, the metallic parts in it, all the little bits and bobs, as much as Dave says, yes, they will be able to take parts out of it, why would they bother? The amount of energy that is put into reclaiming tiny little cogs and wheels and pivot points and things like that and jewels, is it worth it? Do you actually expend more energy? Do you create more negative influence on the environment by doing all those things, greenwashing to get the little parts out versus crush it together and recycle it as metal? So there's lots of little things to play with there. At the end of the day, it's a watch that's a couple 100 grams. It ain't a lot to go in landfill versus everything else that you deal with on a daily, weekly, annual basis that goes in the bin, goes in recycling.
And absolutely, and bear in mind the likelihood is by the time it gets to that stage, this watch could easily be 10 years, 15, 20 years old by the time it decides to finally give up the ghost. So in the grand scheme of disposable goods these days, where you buy things and you're throwing it out within a day or 2 days, 10, 20 years is pretty good going for something, even if it can't be serviced. The other dirty little secret that we could get into maybe more in another episode is just because it's mechanical and serviceable doesn't mean it actually gets serviced. But we can talk about that at a different time.
What do you mean, Dave? Do you mean when you actually hand your expensive luxury Swiss watch back to them for servicing, they put a new movement in it?
That might be very much what I'm getting at, Ricky, but just picture, smoke and mirrors.
We might have to bring a guy called Andy onto the show. He's not Swiss, but he's close to Switzerland. He's been on the show before. He's let many cats out of the bag.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to have to put a pin in that one and come back to it in the near future. But Andy will play a part in the show later on when we talk about what we've been up to. And he has been on many episodes, including video episodes in the past, and he is phenomenal. We should probably move on to, well, let's move on to some feedback from Bandrew, who runs Podcastage. That's the YouTube channel. And he's also appeared on a few live streams on Casual Watch Talk with Sam, Dave, and the other guys that are on there. And he wrote in to actually comment in episode 501, which I missed a trick. I should have called it the Levi's episode.
Although Levi's might have had something to say about that, but maybe we could have called it the Denim 501 episode and folk would have got it, I think.
Well, I don't think Bandrew's from Canada, but he might be. You never know. He wrote in to say, "Hey guys, I really liked episode 501. That old school influencer discussion was fascinating, and I want to learn a lot more about that side of things because it seems like a much more interesting life and job compared to what it is today. Open brackets, email bomb as many people as possible. Thanks for a great show, Bandrew. I don't think it was like that before. It was more a case of nobody came up with the idea of being an influencer. That wasn't what they planned to do. It happened that through their job or what they did as a career in sports and entertainment, they became an influence, but it was never a thing. It was never like, I'm going to turn my job into walking around taking photos of myself and showing everybody these pictures.
Well, no, absolutely, you're correct. Back in I guess, in the old school days of influencing before, well, pretty much before the internet as it is today, before Instagram, Facebook, all of these things. And in the days when people realised they actually had to do some work for a living, as opposed to just putting some pretty pictures up, it was pretty interesting because you had to think a little bit about how you would influence people, how you got under their skin, how you got them to think about things.
Well, speaking of people that are kind of known for doing nothing of merit whatsoever, Julia Fox, who I first saw, I think it was her debut appearance in a movie in Uncut Gems, she turned up at an event recently wearing hardly any clothing, which is not unusual for her, but also she had lots of watches just kind of dangling like tassels on her outfit. Did you see this?
I saw the articles covering it and I thought, well, okay, interesting. I believe it was an event for Pandora, who have been promoting their whole lab-grown diamond technology and jewellery that's devised around this kind of lab-grown diamond industry.
Lab-grown diamonds, you say? That's interesting. It's like we almost learned something about that recently.
Possibly. But yes, back to the story. She was wearing, I guess, not quite a bikini, but, you know, a kind of crop top and some hot pants that were adorned with a whole variety of watches for reasons that I can't quite put my finger on because it was a jewellery diamond event. But hey, you know, in the need of fashion, who knows, maybe the pre-owned watch market might find a new little niche for themselves now that prices are on the slide.
Yeah, it just reminded me of a guy that I saw years ago, and I saw him in real life. It wasn't on the internet the first time, and that's Cronondo. He is a chap from somewhere in Europe. I can't remember if he's German or something like that. And he would wear outfits with all these watches hanging on them. And when the moon swatches came out, he managed to get the full set and had them dangling from him at different events. It's mad.
He used to kind of haunt the floors of the big watch shows, didn't he? And he was kind of the kind of person that folk would clock, a little bit like the guy that would dress up as a devil on the Tour de France and go running up the hill chasing the cyclists. Kind of one of these characters that just was known that at some point he would appear.
Yes, and he is a pretty cool guy. We actually saw him at Watches and Wonders this year when we were down at the Philip Plein Park.
He's always about somewhere. You're just never quite sure. It's like the Spanish Inquisition. No, always expect the unexpected.
Yes, and we should probably unexpectedly tell you what we were up to because we have been on our travels. Lots of things have been on the go. I thought it'd be quite an easy month. I thought after Geneva Watch Days we would get a bit of a breather to just calm our jets, chill out, reflect on what has been an incredible year so far. But no, the guys at Raj, the guys that include Dave, decided they were going to change things up and drag us not back to Switzerland, not to Germany, not to the States, not to Dubai, but across to Spain for no apparent reason. But it is probably the best watch press trip that I've been on, probably the best press trip when it comes to a manufacturer, because we got to see new watches, but who cares about that? You know, you can look at PDFs and we can get sent them and we can use them in the studio. The greatest thing about this was, and for a dedicated watch enthusiast, I wish that this had been opened up to maybe some of the customers, to maybe some of the guys that are really intent on learning stuff, because this was a masterclass. I've seen lectures online from the likes of Roger Smith, people at the Horological Society in New York, the British Watch and Clockmakers Alliance. They've done things as well, they're open dials, but nothing was as cool as what we actually saw there. And I'm not saying that because I'm an Araj fanboy. If anybody remembers the story from the very, very beginning, I actually hated the watches. I hated the watches they sent over, and then they sent more watches, and there was a few that I actually liked, and then I ended up getting myself a Tourbillon one when they first came out. So there is a bit of a love-hate at the beginning, but hey, we've sorted things out, even given Dave on Day release to the guys, so we obviously like them that much. Or maybe we don't. But anyway, let's talk about this trip, Dave. Tell us all about it.
Excellent introduction there. So effectively, we made a decision to have our first, I guess, press camp, media camp, whatever you want to call it. And we thought, let's not just do what everyone else does, which is round up the media, take them, get them drunk, show them a few new watches, and send them on their merry way. That's obviously part of it. We had a few new products that we wanted to introduce, which sadly we can't talk about right now, but next week we can probably touch on those. But we wanted to add a bit more something to it. And what was that something? It was something that could be described as maybe potentially a dry topic, but if you're into your watches, it's very much going to interest you. So we had one of our engineers, that being Florian. He's the lead engineer within Arage and has decades of experience in the Swiss watch industry. He's worked for Fleurier.
From where exactly? Let's have a look at his CV.
He's worked at a huge variety of different movement manufacturers, some of the best known in the industry, and has done some pretty significant things. He's also a professor and lecturer at one of the major watch schools for engineering. And he did what can only be described as a masterclass in how to do certain things and why you can't do other things, why we've been able to do things and why others can't do other things. Not that they can't, that they don't want to, maybe because of tradition or they just don't fully understand certain things. And he talked about how engineering teams and watchmaking teams have to work together closely to get to where you want to be. Lots of talk about how to bring silicon into movements, the maths involved, the geometries involved.
I would say if you're listening to this show or watching us on YouTube for an hour, you have a bit of an interest in things more than just the superficial, it's a cool looking dial in a funky colour with a nice strap. I get emails and people chat to me all the time about the great episodes, the ones where we've got Roger Smith on talking about CNC machines. We've got Stephen McDonnell on for our 500th episode chatting about how he fixed things aged 4 to 7 years of age. And they love that. They love the deep drilling down of information. And this to me was amazing. I love tech. I love cars, engines, all kinds of stuff. And this was in my wheelhouse because I got to learn things, simple things that when you think about them, yes, they do make sense, but you never think about them ahead of time. And for instance, making a micro rotor movement and how large the micro rotor can be and where it should be placed behind the dial so that it actually works properly and it gets enough inertia to wind the mechanism. You mentioned there about silicon, and that has been something that's been very key in the last couple of years, more importantly, but over the last decade, as it's become easier to manipulate and use. Gerard Perregaux used it. Zenith with their oscillating movement tried to give it a good go, but it didn't quite get there, unfortunately. When we were looking at this presentation, and again, the guy is a boffin, but he explains it to the layman. I picked up on everything, and I was half asleep. I think I may have COVID again. I'm not quite 100% at the moment, but even through my dreary eyes, I could kind of make out what he was talking about. And one of the things that stuck out to me was a picture on the projector screen where he had a standard Swiss lever escapement and then he had a silicon version. Half the parts were missing from the new silicon version. The pallet forks didn't exist, to the fact that the pivot at the top, and you'll see the pictures in the video as I'm popping them up just now, or you can check in the show notes and this diagram will be there, because that's something that Andy at Raj was extremely vocal about. He wanted to make sure that everybody knew this information was to be disseminated. Give it to our audience. Nothing is hidden. And the reason for that is the guys know at Raj that it would take other brands, other companies 10 years to catch up, because all this stuff has been worked on behind the scenes. There's been some patents that have only expired in the last couple of years, and it's only when they expired other brands decided to move into it, learn about it, try and adapt, bring out new technologies. Who says you have to wait for them to expire to do the research?
They decided to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. And there were some real interesting questions after that initial presentation as well, which I think came from one of the ladies there, Scarlett, who asked the question, if other people use silicon, why is yours, in this case Arage's, better? And I think when Florian just looked at the screen and the presentation and said, they just make what you make in metal and silicon, they don't realise or haven't worked out that you can materially change it, because silicon is a material you can do different things with. So they just use a standard escapement made in silicon as opposed to, let's see if we can actually make it better.
That was an exercise. It was worth doing, and I'm glad I went. It was a bit strange going again for a one-day event with all the travel that's involved. And I've been to a few where afterwards I've thought, that could have been an email. or that could have been a PDF file. This, you needed to be there in real life. Plus the setting was absolutely stunning and beautiful, and then I came back to Scotland and it's gale force winds and all the rest of it. And as I say, I'm a little bit under the weather, so who knows what's going on there. But at least I'm not dead like the guy from The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Sad, yeah. David McCallum has passed away. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., definitely the series that made him, but then more recently known for being in NCIS.
What country is he from?
Where do you think he might be from, Ricky? Is he from a land that's known for producing a high calibre of individual?
Potentially, yes. No, but the reason I'm mentioning this is, historically we've chatted about people who have unfortunately passed away, and it got to a ripe old age. I mean, if I had those kind of numbers, I'll be quite happy. But I used to watch Man from U.N.C.L.E. when I was a kid, because it used to get repeated on Channel 4 here in the UK, and it was brilliant. And then I actually saw the remake movie version of it, which obviously had completely different cast. I think it was actually put together by Guy Ritchie. Very underrated movie. And it's a fairly recent one, Dave, so I'm allowed to talk about that just now.
I believe he reached the ripe old age of 90, which is not as old as some people, but like you, Ricky, if I get to 90, I think I'll have done a few things okay, and I better probably start thinking about what I need to do additionally to make it to that age. So other than that, anything else you've been watching that probably came out at least 25 years ago?
Can we aim for closer to 40 years ago? I found, by accident, a YouTube channel that has almost every episode of The Twilight Zone. Not the original one from the 60s, not the shitty ones from the 2000s, but the one from the mid-80s. And again, this is something I used to watch as a kid. It was a lot more scary when I was a kid. It doesn't seem to affect me as much just now. And it is super cheesy, but also it brings back great memories. And some of the episodes really do stand out. It's been fantastic. And some of the actors and actresses that are in this, Morgan Freeman, when he's a young dude, and he looks different. Everyone says Morgan Freeman looks the same as he always has. No, he looked younger in this. So I will link the guy's YouTube channel. Go and have a look, because he's not only got the Twilight Zone, he's got the Outer Limits. He's got all kinds of stuff in there. Tales of the Unexpected, Roald Dahl's show from the UK in the 70s and 80s. There's another one that people should have a look at if they haven't for a while. Great YouTube channel. He's obviously spent a lot of time and energy in it. I don't understand how Content ID hasn't wiped him off the face of the planet, but get in there before he gets banned.
Good bit of telly in the 80s. There was always these kind of things that were a little bit cheesy, but seemed to have stood the test of time, which is unusual because there's a lot of stuff out there that really does not do that.
Well, Dave, I think it's about time we did the wrist check, and I will go first. So I am actually wearing a watch that is on loan. Here it is here. And this has been sent up from Theo at IWC. And this is their first pilot watch with a fully loomed dial. I don't know if I want to give it back. I know he's been pestering me for ages. He's a complete numpty. He sends watches to us when we specifically tell him that we're away for a couple of weeks. And then he immediately emails to go, where's my watch? Can I get it back? And we're in a different country, dude. We told you that before we left. But that is Theo. He's a great guy. He has helped us out dramatically with Scottish watches over the past few years. It was him and the team at IWC that organised the David Coulthard episode, which is a firm favourite with the fans. Yeah, this is a cool watch. And I'm going to take it off the wrist. As people who have heard the show for more than a couple of years will know, me and Dave have a bit of a soft spot for IWC. We've had their CEO on the show, and we need to get him back because he is one of the coolest guys ever. That's Chris Granger. He started as an architect. He helped design their boutiques, and then he actually ended up architecting the move forward for IWC and some of the watches they've had out in the last few years. Very, very stylish dude. We will link details to his prior episode in the show notes. But yeah, this watch here, fully loomed dial along with handset. This one is called the Black Aces. Are we allowed to say it's to do with the US Navy? Because I know certain brands, Dave, don't like us mentioning the US Navy.
This is fair, and with this one, you've no option but to mention the US Navy, as this is the Black Aces, a famous squadron, a fighter attack squadron of the US Navy that has a long and, very deserved history. These guys, also for me, I've got a bit of a thing, because when I was a kid, I was very much into aviation, and the F-14 Tomcats were flown by this very squadron, and they had some very, very cool paint jobs.
Did they lose any of those?
Did they lose any of those, Ricky? You might be referring to a recent incident with one of a newer generation of fighters that managed to get lost by its pilot. But yes, they lost many an F-14, usually because they were not quite as reliable initially as they would like it to have been. Maybe not as bad as losing a multi-million dollar stealth fighter.
See, that's the problem. If it's stealthy, you ain't going to be able to find it.
Well,
It's like putting out a missing persons report for John Cena.
true. It's not super stealthy though once you've ejected from it and it's flying on its own and it crashes into a mountainside. That said, they eventually did find it, but if anyone hasn't, we'll try and link in the show notes to the recording of the phone call where the pilot ejected, landed in someone's back garden, and then phoned 911, and the slightly disbelieving operator of the 911 service couldn't quite understand what was being said. Some guy fell into my back garden out of a plane and he's still alive. I don't think she was quite understanding that he was a military pilot and had ejected, but it is very funny nonetheless, and luckily nobody was harmed after the jet carried on flying on its own in autopilot before it decided to crash into the side of a mountain.
That's their story and they're sticking with it. But the story of this watch is, I want to keep it because it's black, it's ceramic, and it's got a fully loomed dial. But we're actually going to go and see the folks IWC shortly, aren't we?
We are indeed, and actually a mere few days after we finish Red Bar Global, we will be speaking with Theo up in Glasgow because he's coming to plan this trip, which says there might be more afoot to this trip than a simple come and see us and we'll show you some stuff.
We should probably tell people that trip involves us getting on a plane and going across to Schaffhausen.
I think that's very much what it is, and yeah, from what he's kind of mentioned so far, it's looking to be quite exciting. So that will be coming towards the end of the year, but nonetheless, keep your eyes and ears open for more news as we find out. So you've done your wrist check. Should I quickly do mine?
Yes, before that, I'll tell people to check the show notes for all the spec, all the details. This one here is around about $6,500 US, 60 meters water resistance, black ceramic, and yeah, I think we'll just lose this one into the vaults here at Scottish Watches. But Dave, you can tell everyone what you're wearing on the wrist today.
So today I have on my Louis Erard Regulator Alain Silberstein edition, which I haven't worn for a little while. Pretty cool wee watch. I actually acquired this one via a friend of the show, Pietro, at the limited edition. This is a 40mm black case, and you'll never miss the fact that this is an Alan Silberstein collaboration. A hand wind ETA 7001 movement display case back on there, which shows the decorated movement and a very subtle kind of engraving on the sapphire back just with Alan Silberstein's signature. I changed out the strap, wasn't a big fan of the original strap, but this is a little custom number from the strap tailor in the Alan Silberstein colours, and it very much makes the watch handsome in my opinion. So that is what I am wearing today.
Well, from Louis Erard to another Louis, and this is Louis Monet, a brand we had on the show just around about Christmas time last year. We recorded a little bit prior to that because we met up with those guys across at Geneva Watch Days last year. And that turns out to be a good breeding ground for finding future guests and brands that we want to talk more to. But we got to see them again at Watches and Wonders. And their CEO is one of the most flamboyant guys in the universe when it comes to watches. He came bouncing in what could only be described as a pimp suit. It was this bright blue velour. It wasn't a tracksuit, because that's what me and Dave were used to, but it was an actual suit. He turned up, shook our hands, showed us the new releases, and that was their Jigsaw watch, which had actual little jigsaw pieces applied to the dial instead of what we initially thought was it was kind of printed that way. No, it turned out it was the actual little parts, and he is just a great leader of a great brand, but they're back with something else. Price point a little bit higher than before, but when you see this watch, I can't think of anything else that looks like it.
So indeed, and this is, it has to be said, also going to be pretty exclusive as it's a piece unique. And what are we talking about here? We are talking about the Louis Monet Cosmopolis. This watch has won a few world records. And by world records, we're talking proper Guinness Book of Records world records. And what is that world record? That world record is the watch with the most different inserts of meteorite in its dial. I believe there are 12 in total. You have meteorite for the main dial. You have 10 almost like marker points for various, hour markers round the dial with different inserts of meteor. And the 12th and final piece being a piece of meteorite that frames round the back of the tourbillon. And I said it's a tourbillon. This watch for me, I'm pretty impressed by it. As a piece of engineering and as a meteor dialed watch, this is Up there with the best. It's got some really cool different colourways, some very unusual meteorite in there as well. 225,000 Swiss franc, excluding tax. No bargain by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a piece unique, something a little bit different. And as you mentioned earlier about the Jigsaw watch, they're very well known for doing something just a little bit different, a little bit left field, quite artistic. I quite like this. I shouldn't like it, but I actually do.
Let's play the game, and I hate this because I really like Louis Monet and I like their CEO, but don't listen to this next part if you like the brand. This watch, ready? You ready for this? This watch reminds me of an old telephone with a rotary dial.
To be fair, you're absolutely correct. It's like the phone that was in your granny's house. It's even got the little kind of meteorite inserts roughly from 7 o'clock round to about 4 or 5 o'clock, so it's exactly the same. It's got the gap at the bottom where you would expect it to be on your rotary phone, so you're bang on there.
But we shall quickly move on to something else, and we'll move on to Freddie Mercury, a guy that's been dead for a while.
He has been, and I find this a bit strange that it's only really come up now that Sotheby's had a huge auction in the last couple of weeks where it would appear that pretty much all of his worldly possessions that haven't been handed out to people were up for sale. His piano and guitar, what seemed to be pretty much every piece of clothing he ever owned, and various other accoutrements and accessories. One of which, and the reason we're talking about it, was a Seiko watch.
That aids him in telling the time.
One that I think was around about £500/dollars back in the day. And it had a very conservative reserve of around, I think, £500 or £600 as well. Did it sell for that? No, it did not. As you might expect, anything with a connection to Queen or Freddie Mercury usually goes for a lot of money, and this went for a lot of money. Over £35,500.
Yeah, it's a watch I'd never seen before. But anyway, moving on from that, I was on YouTube, as I mentioned earlier, and I got recommended a video from Ben Shapiro. And I've mentioned him on the show because I've seen a couple of his videos where he takes to task people at colleges and universities. These were videos from like 7-8 years ago where they come in with some really polarizing opinions but no logic or depth, and he would just take them apart for it. His more recent stuff I've not really paid attention to because it's not that interesting to me, but this video was things he couldn't do without, and it was almost like an EDC video, and it caught my attention because the thumbnail had a No Time to Die Omega in it, and I thought, okay, let's see what's going on here. Click the video, and he starts off talking about his watch collection. And he actually knows a thing or two about them. So yeah, his kind of daily wear is the Omega, but he says because he's got young kids, he's got some beater watches as well that he doesn't mind if they kind of bash around with it and it gets damaged. And he was talking about an old sub that he's had for a while, a 5711, various other bits and bobs before he moved on to his other sort of EDC. But it was really cool to see another person who you wouldn't expect to chat about things or have a deeper knowledge actually know a thing or two. So from Ben Shapiro and his video exploits to DJ Carl Cox and his musical exploits, I was fortunate enough to accompany the guys from Zenith when they came up to Scotland, went on a crazy expedition in a quarry with electric buggies, not remote control, but ones humans would go inside, and they were also launching a couple of watches, an Extreme E edition of their Defy Extreme. There was a little hint that I dropped into the show that we recorded with Cal and also CEO of Zenith, Julian Tonnerre, that potentially something might be coming down the line in September. Well, it happens to be September, and something has come down the line, and it is Carl's second watch, I believe, with Zenith. The first one sold out super quick. It disappeared. When I got to see it, it was already too late. But he's back. He's bigger, he's bolder than ever, and he's got something that's got a little bit of a golden touch to it.
This is the Zenith Defy Extreme Carl Cox edition. Very much like any other Defy Extreme that you would have seen before, but with a few little touches that make it very much a Carl Cox watch. Also, a couple of things they've done with the case that they, to my knowledge, have not done before. This has a different finish on the stainless steel case, that being a matte finished stainless steel case embellished with some gold. So definitely the two-tone vibe going on there. Now, I'm not a big fan of two-tone. This one, much more towards the I might get away with that as a two-tone watch, but the dial for me is where it's all at. You have a sapphire, kind of smoked sapphire dial on here. You've got the rehot ring that resembles some of the parts of DJ decks and vinyl kind of within the sub-dials going on here. So lots of really cool little nods to Carl Cox, who you could argue has been one of the most influential DJs of the last 20, maybe a little bit longer years. He also has a link to Zenith being an ambassador for them. But outside of that, he also has his motorsport business stroke hobby, where he has got involved in Extreme E, as Ricky mentioned, the buggies, these kind of off-road buggies that are all electric, designed around being kind of environmentally sustainable and friendly. And my belief is that it goes around areas that are ex-industrial areas or areas that are about to be rejuvenated and regenerated and reused, and it kind of highlights the whole, environmental message. But back to the watch. Interesting thing here, only 100 pieces, a few different options. You've got a bracelet option. You've got various different kind of rubber stroke fabric straps that are going on with this here as well. I am pretty much a fan of this. I'm not entirely sold on the gold part of it. Dial, sure. Design, movement, all of the other stuff about it, I'm very much on board with. Even like the look of some of these new fabric straps I've got for it as well.
It's not for me. It's a little bit punchy price-wise for my pocket, and I've said this year I am saving my pennies. Last year was an expensive one. I'm licking my wounds a little bit this time around. I like it. I like the design ethos. There's lots of cues, and that was not a DJ pun on purpose, to, for instance, the SL1210 Mark II turntables from Technics. The way that you've got the stroboscopic display on the platter as it rotates round, it shows you the speed and also which territory you're in, if it's 50Hz, 60Hz. And there is an on-off switch where the power indicator is on the actual watch itself. I preferred this previous one, and you will not be able to get that, as you mentioned. And I seem to like a lot of Zenith music watches because I'm still after a Swiss Beats edition. The one that came with the turntable and was orange and black, the Defy. They just make amazing, cool, great watches. And even when we saw them over at Geneva at Watches and Wonders this year, the presentation they gave, the information they give you, and the way they drilled down, very much like the Raj presentation, they don't hold back. They're not scared to go the extra mile and do those extra things. And this watch here, if it appeals to you aesthetically, go for it. It's just a little bit pricey for me.
And one thing I will absolutely say about Zenith is when it comes to collabs, they very rarely get it wrong.
Now, we mentioned earlier on Sam at Casual Watch Reviews. His YouTube channel is fantastic. He does great live streams, and we're bound to have him on the show at some point in the very near future. But he popped something up in one of the WhatsApp groups that we're both in, talking about Timex and the fact that they had some upcycled, restored, I don't know, they've taken old watches from the 80s and the 90s and they've given them a new lease of life. He managed to pick up one of the Datalink watches that I've mentioned loads on the show before, because it was almost like the first smartwatch. You would communicate via your computer, your PC, using a CRT monitor, and the watch itself using a photocell on it, where it would pick up the flashing lights, it would put the details into your watch, and then you could have phone numbers and appointments and things stored on it. But Timex have done some crazy stuff here. Do you know much about it?
I didn't know much about it, it has to be said, until he posted it up. Then I went a bit of a deep dive. Pretty cool program, I have to say. Maybe less greenwashy than some other brands might be at when it comes to the whole kind of environmental or sustainable thing. And also maybe something that will be of interest to the argument that people are having about, Swatch Watch and System 51 and can you service it that we were talking about earlier. What is this? This program is a program to give watches a second life. So Timex are saying, tell us about what you've got. It can be anything, it can be Timex or anything else. Send it in to us. You don't get paid for it. They send you the box, prepaid, stick your watch in, send it off. Job done. What they do is, in return, you get a voucher for a 20% discount off of anything on Timex's site. What they do when they get the watches is either one of two things. They either say it's dead, defunct, done, and they break it down into parts for recycling or reuse or just environmentally being sustainable and friendly with it. Or they think, there's nothing wrong with it. a little bit of a cleanup, a little bit of a disinfectant, and bosh it back up onto their website where someone else can buy it and they can continue to enjoy it. Might just need a new battery, might need a seal replaced on it, might just need a good clean and freshen up. They seem to have had round about 90 watches listed so far, all of them super attainable. The vast majority under $25. So we're talking pocket money here for even most teenagers if you want to get your hands on something. And there's been some really funky kind of little things from the 80s and 90s that have popped up. They don't seem to be gouging either. They're being very fair with prices. I think this is a super cool idea. And I think as this gains a bit of traction, it'll be interesting to see what does pop up and what suddenly comes up. It seems to be popular as well. They've all gone. Those 90 watches, I think there's barely anything left of the first batch of watches that went up. So I really hope that folks start to think, do you know what? It can go in the bin or I can stick it in a box and send it back to Timex and they'll even pick it up. Therefore, it costs us nothing. Only available in the US at the moment, but I very much could see this rolling out. So got to say to Timex, fair play. This is a clever marketing campaign and it's a pretty good idea. And if you're interested in something a bit funky and weird from Timex, then you can buy it from the very people who probably made it the first time round.
Now, is there not some kind of system in place, maybe in the States, maybe not over here in the UK, where if you create a product that's going to end up in landfill as e-waste, then you have to furnish the consumer with a way of getting that back to them so they can reprocess it?
You're right. I'm not sure about the States, but certainly in Europe and in the UK, where most of our laws around these issues still kind of are back from the days of the good old days when we were actually in the EU. Yes, brands have a responsibility for e-waste. Most of these Timexes that we're talking about here, though, they were put into the market decades before any of that even was thought about, was even a twinkle in the regulator's eyes.
You'll not see Apple doing that anytime soon, or at all. I have seen the reports on how difficult and dodgy those 15s are. We're talking about the iPhone, in case you didn't know. Dave's got one. I refuse to. I've seen the reviews. They're not as good as maybe Apple think they are. And here's something for you. Have you ever seen an advert where somebody doesn't claim that this new product is the best ever? It's like every iPhone advert is, oh, this is the best ever iPhone we've ever made. As if you're going to advertise or make something that's shiter than the last one.
Yeah, especially it has to be said, any business that has a kind of marketing department that's firmly embedded in the US, they do love to use the words greatest ever, best ever, twice as fast, 5 times as fast.
I don't mind that, Dave. See if it is genuinely twice as fast or 5 times as fast. That is an accolade to talk about. But when you say, oh, it's the best one we've ever made, the best camera we have ever made, well, of course it is, you fucking idiots.
Well, they usually say that, but it's fair to say that's not always the case.
Apple also made such a song and dance about, you know what, guys? We've got this new thing. It's called USB-C. It's amazing.
I tell you one thing they have done with iPhone 15, just before we finish this. Their new cases are truly, truly awful. They've decided to remove any leather products from their website. So they've decided, for environmental reasons, and there is truth in it, that leather and the leather trade is not particularly environmentally friendly. So those leather cases that personally I've used for many years and I find them very good, a little bit expensive, but very good nonetheless, they've done away with them. And they have this new micro-woven something nonsense.
Can we not just make things out of vegan leather? I wouldn't mind skinning a few vegans.
I mean, this is also fair. I would as well. But this new case, in fact, this very case here, oh my God, awful. It is a micro-woven, environmentally sustainable, friendly product. And frankly, it's shit. Absolutely, truly awful. So Apple, do F up from time to time.
They do indeed. But we're going to finish up the show not talking about Plastic Fantastic. We're going to talk about a 50 Fathoms, the third one to celebrate their 70th anniversary. That's bon bon. And yeah, is this anything to do with that plastic thing that might have been created as a bit of a marketing ploy to drive sales of this super expensive thing?
Well, my understanding is, yes, indeed, it is, because they've done 3 acts. They did the first act, which was a genuine metal lamp. They did the Swatch collaboration as Act 2, which was very much part of the anniversary. And this is Act 3. I don't know what to make of this watch. I kind of like it. I don't want to like it, but I definitely kind of like it. And It annoys me that I like it because it kind of shouldn't work, but just kind of works. 555, that's how many they're making. Using a material that looks very much like bronze, but isn't, and this is bronze gold, a material from the larger owner of the brand, that being Swatch Group, who have used bronze gold before with Omega. What is the metal? 37.5% gold, a big chunk of bronze, and a few other stuff in there, like palladium, a little bit of platinum. So it looks like bronze, it's got a little bit of weight to it, but it doesn't patina essentially at all, maybe the tiniest of bit. So it maintains its look. So it's got this kind of bronze look, stroke gold look to it. I actually quite like the material, I have to say. I think that was something that draws me to this a little bit. They've got the little moisture indicator on the dial there. That kind of harks back to those mil-spec watches that they have a kind of history with as well. That's where it gets a bit weird because it's in this kind of white and grey. Doesn't really fit into the palette of colours of these golds and bronzes, along with the kind of faux patina radium style superluminova that's on the dial as well. So you've got these browns, tans, golds and bronze colours. Then you've suddenly got this white and grey moisture indicator on it. But it also kind of works at the same time.
I like it. Don't like the price, but I like the watch. And I don't know if that's because I have looked at the kids watches and plastic and thought, yeah, okay. And then this has come along and it's substantially better. Therefore, analysis paralysis has not kicked in. I've went, oh, that's pretty cool. Who knows? I need my bed. I'm going to the doctor soon, so I'm going to end the show just now. I'm going to let Dave go because he's got other things to do. We've had to rearrange the schedule due to my illnesses at the moment. So I'm just going to say, if you're watching the video, sub to the channel. If you kind of like, it gets better. This was pretty ropey. I'm going to admit it gets a lot better. So sub to the channel, like the video, comment, tell me how bad it really was. Have a look at some of the prior editions. Look forward to the later editions because they will be far better. And be sure to check out the website. That's where Miziel's spelling mistakes live, unless he edits them. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. And also, if you want to get in touch with us, drop us an email. Don't DM us. info@scottishwatches.co.uk is the place to go. And follow us on Instagram @ScottishWatches. Anything you want to add in, Dave? Because I'm sure I've forgotten something.
I think that's it. Other than that, you're listening to this on Thursday. If you listen to it as it comes out and you still fancy Red Bar Global, there's still a couple of tickets available. If you're going already, we'll see you there because we're doing some live recording. Other than that, everything Ricky just said, and we better let him get to the doctor before he keels over and there's no more podcast.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to 90, so I've got a bit of a distance to go, so I'm out of here. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys again soon.